It's pretty awesome being the last Marines here, closing down the base. I'm just glad I got to come here and participate in, what we're doing. So that's been a great experience.
Mixed emotions as the last of the coalition bases in Afghanistan are handed over. The last two bases, one American and one British, were turned over to Afghan control at the weekend. All NATO combat troops are set to depart Afghanistan by December. The fight against the Taliban in Afghanistan has claimed more than 2,300 American lives and more than 450 British. While the U.S. is drawing down its combat operations in Afghanistan, it is in the midst of a renewed battle in Iraq and now Syria. That battle is against the Islamic State, or ISIL. Opinions about how the U.S. should fight the terrorist group are wide-ranging here, with just 6 days to go before an important election. CCTV's Callebs continues his road trip to a small town in the U.S. state of Missouri as Route 2014 rolls on.
The trip through the heartland stops near Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, where foreign policy affecting U.S. troops is a key election issue. The town of Waynesville sits in the shadow of the Army training base. Few things are as American as the annual Homecoming Day parade. A pep rally of sorts for the high school football team.
Homecoming is usually that one game a year where, you kind of forget about what record you have and where you are, and everybody just kind of brings their A game. It represents the community.
Many of the town's residents are rooted in the military. Varen Martinez served 20 years in the U.S. Army. Martinez can spend more time with his family and new granddaughter now that he works as a contractor for the Army at the fort. He thinks the midterm elections provide an opportunity to make some course corrections in Washington.
I don't speak negative of Democrats nor of my commander-in-chief. I don't agree with the direction that he's taken the military.
Another 20-year vet, Jesse DeGrafton Reed, is more direct.
We're tired of the same old business in Washington, D.C., and we want changes, and not just, the president, vice president, changes across the board.
He points to Barack Obama's foreign policy, especially in Iraq, as a reason for the president's plunging popularity.
Soldiers died in that area. So for me to have spent, several months in operation in that area, and now for that area to be turned back over, it's no longer in a, it's back in a hostile fighting environment. It's kind of sad.
Varen Martinez's son is the star quarterback for the Waynesville Tigers, number 18.
Go get it! Go get it!
There's a saying in American football that the best offense is a good defense.
Good job, defense!
Martinez served 4 rotations in Iraq and worked in Afghanistan, and he is frustrated that the Islamic State controls much of Iraq and that the region is in shambles.
That's a sore spot for us guys that have been to Afghanistan and Iraq, because we knew what the sacrifices, our battle buddies around us and the units that we've all been deployed with. Every single military service member has known somebody that was either seriously injured or passed away.
Pass! Ball!
Under the lights on a crisp autumn evening, it's easy to forget about the constant threat of terrorism, the Islamic State, and turmoil following more than a decade of war.
Let's get it in there, boys. Let's get it in there.
But Martinez says now is not the time for complacency.
Our biggest challenge is getting folks to take those beliefs and go out and actually do something about it, which is to vote.
And he expects frustrated military voices will be heard at the polls in a matter of days. Sean Callebs, CCTV, Waynesville, Missouri.
Military spending is the United States' second biggest expenditure, and though there are efforts to cut the budget, it's proving to be easier said than done. I asked David Courtwright, Director of Policy Studies at the Kroc Institute, whether the military budget should be cut or if it's even possible.
Certainly the U.S. could cut way back on that high level of military spending. As you know, we are spending as much on the military as the rest of the world combined. That's much more than we need. There have been a number of studies done by top-level research centers in Washington indicating that we could cut back $100 billion, maybe $200 billion or more, and still retain enough security capacity to keep America safe and to address international responsibilities. There's a lot of waste, a lot of excessive spending in that Pentagon budget.
Let's talk about the U.S. and NATO leaving Afghanistan. Of course, we saw this scenario before in Iraq. Is there any chance that the United States might leave their presence there in Afghanistan and then have to return later? I mean, what do you see as that scenario?
Well, certainly that danger exists. We saw that in Iraq. We pull out completely. The instability increases, violence rises, and we're forced to come back in. I think in Afghanistan, the plan is to try to avoid that scenario, and one of the ways will be through this new bilateral security agreement that we've signed with the new government in Afghanistan, and that will provide for a limited number of U.S. and some NATO troops to remain on the ground in Afghanistan to focus primarily on training of the Afghan security forces. That will help. But the thing we are lacking in Afghanistan is a strategy for ending the war. Unless there's some kind of a political agreement that's arranged between the Afghan government and the insurgent forces, the fighting will go on. And as you know, the intensity of the fighting has actually increased over the last couple of years. So we need some residual forces from the U.S. and NATO to stay there to help stabilize, but we also need to have a much stronger commitment to a diplomatic strategy.
David, I want to ask you, we've got an election next week here in the United States. If the Senate were to be taken over by the Republicans, if it was a Republican-led Senate, will we see more of that effort, do you think? Obviously, a lot of Republicans saying that the spiraling deficits need to come down, the spending needs to come down, and yet many of them also very hawkish when it comes to defense. I mean, how do you see that landscape changing?
Yeah, I think these kind of security issues, international relations issues, typically don't really play much in these midterm elections. It's pretty much about domestic policy. You're right that many Republicans have been pretty hawkish on these issues, but frankly, I don't think it'll make much difference if the Senate shifts more toward Republican in this election, because the Republican senators, like the Democrats, are going to have to face these fiscal realities. As you say, there's budget pressures. I think there's I hope, a growing recognition that we can't use military force to solve a lot of these problems. And if we focus more on diplomacy and political solutions, continue to provide development assistance to try to raise the economic well-being of these countries, these regions, that's a better way to try to combat this problem of terrorism rather than constantly being involved in military operations.
That was David Courtwright joining us from Indiana. Of course.